Disrupting Game Platforms and Economies. So it's a very big title. Welcome to Disrupting Game Platforms and Economies. It's a very big title, clearly, but I think it does give a sense of the size of the opportunity that people, both operators and investors like myself, and we'll get into backgrounds, the size of the opportunity that people believe is out there for blockchain and games. Two kind of huge industries growing really quickly, and so when you put them together, a lot of people think some really interesting things can happen. You guys may have seen that there was a survey out, I think Ivan at Game Lab put out, what is the most interesting, innovative topic that developers want to learn about. There was things like mixed reality, interactive storytelling, and blockchain was kind of right at the top. So hopefully there's some appetite there. Blockchain as a whole, it's had a lot of hype, and I think earlier in this year, we saw that the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018, and got a taste of what games in blockchain can do with things like CryptoKitties. People were trading millions of dollars for buying, selling, breeding these avatars. That really brought it, I think, to the forefront of a lot of people's minds. But it also similarly very quickly died away. And so I think it's clear there are some challenges, but obviously huge opportunities. And I think that's really what we kind of were hoping to explore today. And so to get a sense of what we think lies ahead and some of the obstacles, I think we've brought together a really interesting group of people, some of whom have worked in traditional games, and they've kind of seen the light, I guess, and kind of moved towards blockchain, as well as studios which have a lot of history in, again, kind of non-blockchain games that are now trying to explore it. So with that being said, I have the pleasure of being joined by this wonderful group. And so I guess I'll hand over to you guys, and if you want to just have a quick introduction about yourselves, and also kind of what your companies are doing, I think that'd be really helpful for the audience.
Hi, I'm Alex Amsel. I currently work at Fig.co, and as a company, we help game developers crowdfund for investment and reward-based crowdfunding. But I'm actually from the blockchain space for the last few years, so I've been working with Bitcoin and blockchain since late 2012, and talking about how games could potentially benefit from blockchains. And that's because I originally come from the game industry. I ran a game studio for 15 years. And in fact, I got involved with all of this because a game of ours called Euphoria, someone wanted to buy it with Bitcoin, and I thought they were crazy. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized I'd rather do blockchains than games for a few years, because I could see it was going to change the world in some way. I just didn't quite know how. So now I actually work on blockchain strategy at Fig.
I am Enrique Lifiers. I am the co-founder of Bossa Studios. We make crazy games like Surgeon Simulator and I Am Bread. But the next generation of games, Worlds Adrift, and the next ones all rely heavily on UGC, user-generated content. And our vision is that the players will start trading with one another the content they create. So if I create a skin, a mod, a piece of content for the game, I will put on the marketplace, and somebody else will buy so they can enjoy the game with that item. And that goes to the heart of blockchain enable us to do.
Hi, my name is Esteban Ordano. I'm a CTO and co-founder at Decentraland. Decentraland is a virtual reality platform owned by its users. I started the project about 3 years ago, but definitely went into this super deep this past year recently. I also come from the blockchain space. I've been working on Bitcoin-related companies since 2013.
I'm Jon NEVERDIE. NEVERDIE is my avatar name, and from about 20 years ago, I realized it would be possible to make money playing games, so I created an avatar and was able from 2005 to make a living inside an MMO. And so over the last decade, I've wanted to see that opportunity expand for more and more people. And so I started NEVERDIE Studios in 2009 to build virtual worlds, pop culture virtual worlds where there would be some type of interoperability. And we reached the limit of growing MMOs because of the amount of time that people have to invest in one avatar. And so I realized that the only way forward was to create interoperable avatars, interoperable skills, and the blockchain was and is the only way to do it. So basically, we've moved into that direction to create basically blockchain-based avatars and skills. So you're never going to be stuck in one game again.
Perfect. Very quickly on myself, I guess. So I'm an investor at Atomico, which some of you guys might know, based in London and investing globally. But we're super interested in games. Bossa with AmeVRica, for example, Supercell, Rovio, and I'm sure I'll kind of meet plenty of you kind of today. Awesome. So thanks for the introductions. I guess we got a bit of a taste for it. I think you guys are so deep into the space, and you kind of talk blockchain all day. I think it'd be really interesting to get the views for some people who love games. Why you guys think blockchain is so exciting, and what can you do with this technology that you can't do in a traditional kind of games paradigm? I don't know if anyone wants to kind of jump in there, otherwise.
Yeah, sure. So blockchains are the first solution to a millennial problem. Not millennial as in the selfie culture, but millennial as in it's been hundreds and thousands of years since we've been trying to find a solution to keep a ledger of who has such and such amount of money, and to keep that in a secure way, in a way that there's nobody that can decide on some updates to this database that is not following the rules. So if you think about it, the Bitcoin software is, when it runs from my computer, it connects to random people from the internet, and from the messages it collects, it builds up a ledger that is nowadays worth $100 billion. So that's pretty impressive. There's a lot of value out of that, securing a database that can be applied to games. And also, not just because of the security of it, but the permissionless innovation that can happen on top of that, and also how games could store a lot of information in there in a way that cannot be hacked, cannot be stolen, and it can also survive the lifetime of a game. And after many years, I can continue using some items as long as they are on a blockchain. Like what Jon said, my avatar can survive a game and continue living on somewhere else.
Yeah, we have seen so many games that we loved come and go. And the only thing that is left for us is we can run them on emulator, or we can remember our experiences. What if some of the stuff that we accumulated, we got, we could keep and reuse, take with us. So we are no longer dependent on the developer holding the key to keep the world alive. If the developer goes out of business and the game is gone, that game could be renewed by someone else, or at least the assets of it could go into a new game, or you could do something game A and take it to game B. That alone, for me, is a justification for blockchain to be looked at seriously by developers and players. But also the fact that it will enable new types of game to emerge, because it's a new technology, and with it comes new design paradigms. So it will be very interesting to see what else can be done that without blockchain could not be done.
Yeah, I think that the most interesting thing is the fact that because we can have the fact that you own something is independent of, say, an Apple App Store or Sony's PlayStation Network Store. If we had a ledger which held information for all the digital content you owned, maybe even some physical content, what could we do with that? Now, as game developers, if you start playing around with some ideas of, oh, well, if I create an item, I could sell that or give it away to my users, but actually it could do something in this game, and in this game, and in this game, and they're the ones that get to be in my early access. And actually, I'm really friendly with that developer over there. Well, we're going to promote each other's games by supporting each other's game items. I'm going to come up with some gameplay which requires gamers to play multiple games in order to proceed and cooperate with one another. That's where it gets really fascinating, because as designers, we can create more engaging content for our gamers, and as gamers, we get more rewarding content. So it works both ways.
Yeah, this is just fantastic. Just to be actually here at this moment in time where you've got developers really committed to making this happen it's just fantastic. I mean, 2 years ago, I was talking about this with no means to do it. and here we are. And the thing about these items, it's not just nostalgia that is involved in, you know, being able to use an item once the game's gone. But there was labor involved in acquiring the item. It was something that you worked for. So you're not just having some game asset, you know, that you can then use. It's the value of the time you invested in acquiring an item is preserved, and you can trade it later on, 10 years, because it's still useful. So, you know, this is why the blockchain is so, you know, the whole technology is opening up something fantastic.
It's not even trading of stuff. Trading is a very common theme, and it's very, very powerful. But when we play games, like if you played Pokemon as a kid, or Neopets, which one of my colleagues does, or one of my colleagues created, or any kind of game you played on a PlayStation or back in the Amiga days, or whatever it happens to be, there are things you earned in that game that you collected that right now you said you can't experience unless you play an emulator, which is kind of a pain. I want to be able to go back and emotionally experience some of my old collections. So it's not just about trading. It's like, this was my stuff. It should come with me. I should be able to keep it in my box, in the same box that I keep all my old cinema tickets and that I keep all my old gig tickets. I want the same for my games.
Yeah. Can you imagine how many hours we sunk into, say, Ultima Online, right? And running from the dungeons and leaving Trinsic and trying to go to another city and being killed halfway through. Now, that's a lot of effort we should be recognized by and say, wow, you guys, you're good, you are good, you were in a guild. So where is that? If you don't tell, people don't know. It's all lost to the wind, right? And this is one of the things that blockchain can bring to us in the future, is this perception of ego and progression and value as a player, almost like a summary of your history as a player throughout endless amount of games. You see that a little bit in achievements in certain platforms, but the achievement is almost like a seal, a representation of what you did. It's not what you actually did. What if I could use that item that I unlocked into a new game and so on. So the boundaries here are very, very open now. And that's what is excited to look into it.
Yeah, achievements is also another thing that you can put inside of a shared database like a blockchain. For example, there's a market, I think, on eBay for buying used Grammys or other things like that. But if I can get the championships, let's say the internationals price, and I can buy it from the champions, and I can store it in my loot box or in some way.
Exactly, it's not just a sword. It's the sword that particular player unlocked in that particular episode, right? Yeah. So imagine this: we're watching a World Cup match, and someone uses that ball to make a goal for Barcelona or for Spain, right? You can get that ball, that one, because just one of it.
And now imagine going into a VR world, this is what I envision third-party people will be able to do, like just fans. You create a VR world, and in that VR world, it's a virtual museum. You go into the virtual museum, and actually you curate that museum. You put a level that someone's created that's for all your Marvel stuff, for all your Marvel games, and then within that Marvel museum, you've got you can put like all the things that you earned, whether it's achievements or items, and there's the history of it and information. It might be signed by an esports team if it's an esports game. Maybe it even has a price tag, so you can go through people's VR world, different museums, and see their curations, and maybe either experience them, see when they won it on Twitch or on YouTube, or you can actually participate in an auction for it. Yeah. It's just different ways you can experience each other's content and their stories.
You're describing a lot of the experiences that I'm trying to build on Decentraland in the very short term to set up a museum, but not only for items. I also think that VR worlds are a way in which, if it's social as well, it can also be a hub to explore new games and explore new opportunities. So in some sense, it can also be used to fix some discoverability problems for indie games that they have this problem of how to get a larger audience. And if it's a social experiment on a VR world that is owned by its users, which has no fees, which has no rent seeking, then I think there's a lot of value in there.
So, yeah, I mean, super interesting. You guys talk a lot about trading items between games, and it'd be cool if you could have an item from a game that you played a decade ago and could kind of carry that with you in the same way that you carry your physical belongings. I mean, from a games designer's perspective, though, I know everyone, you spend months and months refining meta and making things a balance and things. How do you kind of, again, as you say, it's a new paradigm, but how do you make sure that things remain balanced when you can bring in a weapon or an item from a completely unrelated game that, when you designed your game, you had no idea could come in?
Mm-hmm. Never die.
Oh,
Take
yeah.
that one?
Well, the good thing, I've been involved in Entropia Universe for the last 10 years or more, and in that centralized world, we actually have other planets with different developers. So we've actually had to go head to head on, opening our worlds to items found on another planet, created by another developer. And actually, sometimes I've wanted to shut the borders down, and some of my worst, actually, trade wars, real political trade wars and antagonism has developed because of this issue. But the bottom line is it was totally doable. And so the blockchain just extends that to being able to do it, not just on one platform, but platform to platform. So the reality is you have to create a balancing system. In this world, which is where, depending on the model of the car that you make and, how powered up it is, gas will get you so far, right? It's pretty much universal around this world. Like if you eat an apple in France and you eat an apple in America, at the end of the day, unless, the size of the apple is factored in, you get about the same amount of calories and energy and, So this world that we live in, country to country, if you're trained as a doctor in one country, you can, even if you don't have a license, you can pretty much diagnose somebody in another country. And when you're creating virtual worlds and games, you have to basically create these rules that we all abide by, right? So when you do it in one game, it's easy because it's just you. But if you're going to create a universal type of platform, if you're going to create truly interoperable items, then we all have to kind of find a consensus of what is the value of an apple. How much is a day's worth of grinding worth, What is the value of somebody who was able to, succeed getting through a level without dying? If we can find that consensus amongst us, then we can actually create interoperable items. And I know we can do it. It's tricky, but we can do it. And then the more games that jump on board, we start to employ AI that can help us do it. So,
I think there's multiple ways of looking at it as well. There's not just one thing to do. It's not just about creating items that are interoperable within the same game world, but through multiple games, which is one of the things you've just spoken about. I think it can be interoperable around the same IP, or it could be they're interoperable in quite different ways. It's actually just if you've got something that from a Bossa title, it might actually just be, well, in my game, which has nothing to do with Bossa, it might be quite different. It still might mean you get some advantage in my game because maybe I want to attract Bossa's users. Maybe Bossa wants to offer their users something valuable to them, which you think would be really good for them. So magic sword in one game doesn't have to be a magic sword in another. It might not even make sense, or it might unbalance the game too much. But it might just be if I can see you play lots of RPGs, my new RPG, I might do some things to encourage you to come and play my RPGs because you already own some items in it, which you already play them in another game. So there's different ways to look at it. And items don't have to be magic swords or very explicit. I think you're doing things with skills as well.
Yeah, absolutely, skills.
So you can be gradually powering yourself up to play in other game worlds around the same IP. Or it could be things like membership, or it could be the fact that it could be like an achievement, it might not be transferable, but it's all on the same system, and that's what's really powerful. It's on the same neutral system that anyone can use for their own benefit. And that anyone includes gamers and app developers and game developers and publishers. And that's one of the key things about this, about using a blockchain to do this and not something else, is whatever, what we want it to be, what we want to be compatible, that's what's compatible. If we want our game to be very much based around user-generated content, and we want our users to get to take advantage of the fact that blockchains enable true digital scarcity, then they can do it. We don't have to build that for them. It's already there. It's for all of us.
Yeah, it's, as I mentioned, as far as I can tell, it's endless. Imagine things like, I see that a player has a magic sword from Diablo, has a helmet for World of Warcraft, has a piece of armor from any other game. I won't tell him what levels are in my tutorial. I won't tell him how to use the mouse to move the character around. I can just put him 3 levels ahead because I know that he, as a player, is an experienced player. Even how you design your game experience can change based on what you can recognize from that player experience through his blockchain, through his accumulated history as a player. So it's endless. It's literally endless possibilities that blockchain enable. I think it's perhaps just worth mentioning what blockchain is a little bit, because I don't think everybody might know. Think of blockchain as simply as a database, a place where you can put things in and you can take things out. But everybody knows what's going in and what's going out, and the rules are agreed by everybody. So Alex cannot go in with his game and change it, and all of a sudden make something disappear, or create more of something that was not agreed on. So we all know the commonalities of the rules. We all know what's going on, and all of a sudden there is some level of trust that this is worth that, or this is real and it's not faked, and so on. That's the only difference between, well, there are several differences, but from a practical point of view, that's one of the differences of blockchain and a traditional database.
Yeah, no, super interesting. We've talked a lot about some of the opportunities that, for example, as you've mentioned, kind of tradable items between games and things, and as you say, that's kind of one application of blockchain. I think broader in venture, we've seen the kind of launch of blockchains with, you know, ICOs, some of them which will do very well and some which may not. It's really changed the funding landscape. Similarly, in games over, you know, the past few years, we've seen how games are funded and crowd participation, etc. That's also changed. It'd be great to get some views on, you know, especially for some of the smaller studios who might be interested in how can I get people who want my game to help fund it and get this off the ground. Do you think it opens up new doors in that way?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to skip over the idea of ICOs, which is basically you create a currency and then you pre-sell it. I'm going to let someone else discuss that one maybe, mainly because it's a very complicated topic full of regulation and fraudulent usage. What interests me though is if I'm trying to raise finance for my game, one of the ways we can do it right now, and it's what we do at Fig, is you can do reward-based crowdfunding. You could use a Fig to do that, you could use Kickstarter, and you have tiered rewards. And those tiers are things like, well, you get a copy of the game, you get a copy of the game and a poster, or you get a copy of the game and a poster and 3 characters you can use within the game. And now if we think about, well, if we've got items and characters that are used in the game that people can own and in some cases trade, those tiered rewards can either contain or be replaced by you're buying the content and collectibles that are used within your game. In fact, within your games, plural, because it could be across multiple games. You could give them all sorts of kind of utility. So actually, you might find it's easier to raise money for your game, and there are blockchain games that have done this by pre-selling content for your game that's collectible and is very, very scarce. So you could have 100 characters. There's only ever going to be 100 of those characters ever, so they're already special. And you could sell them potentially for a really high price. You could sell them for $1,000. I think one game's just sold 10 of them for $10,000. Because in a sense, if they're tradable as well, they're kind of an investment. And even if they're not tradable, I still might want everyone to know that that's absolutely mine, and I might get exclusive access to content, exclusive forum usage, exclusive Discord usage, just for having that content. So pre-selling of content, I think, could be really, really powerful.
Yeah, the new licenses and how the interoperability of items connect with this subject is pretty interesting. So I could perhaps start a new set of items like magic spells, and I can have other games actually use those spells or that gaming system or that magic system, or perhaps a guild system where I sell the licenses to create your guild. And I think that this empowers indie developers a lot, because for the first time we have the ability to create open networks that can be leveraged to create a game that I couldn't actually scale in some way unless I had all of these already created. And I can reuse these systems into another game. And with intellectual property, it's still not quite clear, like Enrique said earlier. We are at the Pong level with using blockchain. We're trying to imagine a Call of Duty in an age where we are still figuring out how to build space invaders. Yeah. But even though it's very much in the early days, we're already seeing some experimentation about what does it mean to own an item. Do I also own the intellectual property? If I create a set of items, or if I create a contract for this magic system, how will this new economic model of being open from the beginning will relate to the current system that everything is closed for the time being, and you have different account systems on every different platform, and the ability to experiment with an API that will never change, the ability to incorporate items and memorabilia from another game I think that it should be at least subject to the idea that if I own this item and your game is incorporating this kind of item, then you should not allow any user to wield my sword or something like that, because I'm not the actual owner. I'm the actual owner of that. I'm not sure if I own the IP, but that guy definitely shouldn't be allowed to use my sword in his game. So it's very much in the early days, but the experimentation that is going on is definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, I'm just on that note, I mean, there's been a half a dozen games recently that have employed the sale of items in order to fund the development, and it's working. I mean, I'm buying, and I think suddenly they're discoverable because of the nature of the crypto universe right now, and there's a fantastic system out there. I mean, well, this is the blockchain, but there's a couple of sites, DAppRadar and State of the DApps, and what they do, they list all of the new DApps that are in development, which are decentralized games, applications, or whatever it is, and then they read the contracts to determine exactly who's playing, how many people are playing, how much money is going in and out. So you're actually getting a real picture of the success of the game versus the idea that a publisher wants to sell you. And so people are discovering games because of the organic popularity. And you just, as a gamer, you're just saying, I want that or I don't want it. If it's well designed, you are spending your money. So I've seen really clever things where developers are making, let's say, the first stage of their game. So you can, it's almost like you make your demo and then people can buy into it and get a bit of playability, and then they've got their roadmap, and then the next thing is coming out 2 weeks later.
Definitely radical transparency. In the Decentraland, we actually did an auction sale of the land plots in this virtual world, and we've seen people from the community coming up with ideas like an AI that automatically grades how worth your land is, or like people publishing stats about how to look for good deals in terms of land and all of that, and it's very interesting.
You know, this is just had a thought that what's really interesting here is it's now becoming part of the gameplay to participate in the evolution of a game and watch it evolve and speculate on how if it's going to actually evolve. You know, it's a new level of engagement that's coming from this type of financing model.
It's cool. Next level open source. It's open networks.
Yeah, it's great, and there's a huge amount of influence that the gamers and the players and the users have, essentially, even without being given, let's say, a set of tools. Just their true reactions to things is having an impact on the direction.
So one of the important points about that is that, as we all know from crowdfunding, sometimes the games take a very long time to make, or might not appear at all, or maybe aren't what the users expected.
That third one is always the case.
Yeah. But if you think about it, if the items that people have bought early on, there's two really, really special things about those items. The first thing is that the developer of those items, the creator in the first place, they're incentivized to imbue them with some kind of value that might be outside of the game. It could be collections in a set, so it could be really fancy artwork that can be viewed really well. It could be that item is used in another of their own games. It could be that item gives you a discount for some of their previous content. Or it could be that they've encouraged other developers to support that content in some way. So immediately, when you've bought that item, it doesn't have to be, I wait 2-3 years down the line and then get disappointed, or the game never happens. It might have some utility to me from day one. It could even just be signed by the developers. There's always something you can do. But the other thing is, let's say the developer does nothing and they really totally fail, but they had a crowdfunded game that crowdfunded like $1 million. That's $1 million of value that a lot of users have obviously put together. They obviously cared about it enough. Someone else will give those items utility. Someone else will give them value. Someone will bring that audience to their game. So no longer are we definitely stuck with this crowdfunded thing that nothing ever came out. I've got something as a reward, and actually someone else can give it value. It could even be me. It could even be some of those fans get together, create their own game around those items. And that's very, very new. That's never been possible before.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about kind of, the big vision, and I think the quote around, we're trying to imagine Call of Duty when we're still at Space Invaders or Pong or whatever it is, is very apt. Clearly, there's a long road ahead, and I think everyone knows. It'd be great to get a sense of what you guys think are some of the kind of the immediate challenges. I don't know. We talked a little bit about the change to games design that people have to think about. But maybe there are others. I don't know whether it's talent or kind of onboarding of people who don't really understand blockchain or crypto very well. Over the next few years, what really needs to be overcome for companies like yourselves to move forwards?
So right now we don't have blockchains that can really handle a lot of transactions per second. The best blockchain out there, Ethereum, is really struggling to achieve more than a few transactions per second, and we need hundreds of thousands. But the solutions are coming, and that's definitely from the infrastructure level one of the challenges that we've got. I will also say that there's definitely a lack of tools to build on top of blockchain, and there's a lot of user experience hurdles, like integration with existing wallets. Handling your private key is something that we are not used to it. And there's also a very problematic situation with the privacy and identity aspects of blockchain. Everything is out there, everything is super transparent, and that is definitely that's going to bring some challenges in the future. For example, there's I'm sorry to take a step out of the gaming for a minute, but there's a project out there building a proof of location. You know that you can always fake your GPS signal this system will try to fix that. But if it's out there in the blockchain, then that means that anybody, if it's completely transparent, anybody can know where I'm at any time. That's a little bit creepy. But and in terms of financial regulations, blockchains allow for something that is very interesting called triple entry accounting. My balance sheet can like correlate with all the other balance sheets in the world, and there are a lot of ways that we can add privacy without losing security. So I don't have to make everything public about all my holdings of my items. I don't want everybody to know that I have the Vorpal sword from some game. But if somebody asks, I can provide a proof of how much assets do I own and everything like that, which is very good for governmental policy in terms of the financial aspects of it.
Well, for me, as a developer right now, is the lack of tools, which you mentioned, right? So a lot of stuff has to be built from scratch, and there's always that question, should I invest time on this or on something else, a feature that the games are asking for, and so on. But also, just the sheer amount of things that could be done, and what is the right stuff to focus upon, that you can build a narrative on top that the players understand. Because most of the things we are talking here, we understand because we are involved in this world, but when you start to translate the value of this to players, it's super complicated. And it can actually bite us back, because as Alex was mentioning, there were already a few ICOs, people who raised money, and the money disappeared, or the game didn't get done, or it didn't realize the vision, etc. And all of a sudden, the whole blockchain ecosystem, even the ones that don't use ICOs, could be painted in the same brush and say, oh, this is all about the scamming people, etc. So there are dangers here with communication. And those, I think, will be bigger challenges for us to surmount, particularly when we know that our audiences are very vocal and very savvy, right? We saw recently the huge backlash of a simple SDK tracking people's journey, so they could attribute, oh, I put this ad here, and they bought the game on Steam, and even that, people were super nervous to have on their PC games. So there's a lot of challenges here, but I think that the biggest one would be pick and choose what is best to base your strategy upon that will not run too much risk of being misused by someone else and you being painted with the same brush.
Yeah, for me, it's user experience. The user experience of using blockchains, which is usually through a cryptocurrency or through DApps, like blockchain-enabled websites, it's terrible. I mean, it's really bad, and it's not improving fast, if that makes sense. And part of the reason for that is the people involved we're quite technical. We've got so used to complicated notions of things like gas, which, like, what's gas? I don't know. We've got so used to these notions that we just tend to say, well, you'll get used to it. It'll be fine. It's not fine. I mean, I don't think. I think we're going to see a mainstream game use blockchain, but I don't think its users, for the most part, are going to know they're using a blockchain.
Yeah.
All they will see are the benefits. A subset of those users will know, and a subset of those users will be using a cryptocurrency associated with it because it's a bit cheaper for them to do, or they get certain advantages. Everyone else, if it'll be wrapped by a publisher or a retailer or a developer, they'll look after all that. The user, the gamer, will just see the benefits. And that goes both ways. The developer also shouldn't have to worry about all the problems of blockchains, whether it's security or transaction fees. They just need a nice set of tools to allow the gameplay to be different, or to fundraise, or whatever it happens to be. So usability all round is a very major problem, and that's going to take some time to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. Blockchain is more like OpenGL or Direct3D. The user doesn't have to know in some
yeah, but even as developers, we need the Unity or the Unreal on top, yeah. Right? And hopefully you were building it.
It's in Unity, yeah. But I think it's also important to consider that we've said it's early stage, and this has led me to do some research into other early stage technologies. And it's really interesting. Like, I didn't realize the telephone when it was invented, people thought it was probably going to be the equivalent of radio, but you picked up the receiver. It wasn't meant for people to speak to each other one-to-one. It was radio. And that's how it was used, I think, in Hungary or somewhere in Eastern Europe for quite a while. And then people discovered, you know what the best use for a telephone is? We can speak to each other. And I think a lot of blockchain stuff's going to be the same. We're going to discover what works well within a game environment, whether it's through design or whatever. I mean, there were uses, we talked a lot about game items here, but there are other uses of blockchains within games that we haven't talked about on this stage, such as we had a lunch and we were speaking about a blockchain-based organization where you can manage your guilds with all these people you don't know and controlling, perhaps millions of dollars of Warcraft gold and swords and items, but we could actually be controlling it using a blockchain-based organization because it removes a lot of the trust problems. That's a longer thing to go into, but there's a lot of other ideas that blockchains could be used for within a game's context that we just need the chance to explore it.
No, I think we've talked a lot about kind of the opportunities and challenges. I think maybe in the audience there are people who, they've dabbled a little bit in crypto, they've bought some Bitcoin, bought some Ether, and are now trying to think, how can, I experiment with this in kind of my day-to-day job in the games industry. What's your kind of advice on people who maybe they understand crypto a bit and they're keen to get involved and in how they can apply it to games? How should they go about kind of learning or getting involved with the scene and the community?
Well, just dive right in. I mean,
I was about to say.
I mean, I'll tell you, just when we just built our first. We funded NEVERDIE through an ICO last year. Actually launched it on this stage. Of course, the pre-sale was what really funded it. But this time last year, with no knowledge whatsoever of how to do anything with a smart contract, and we actually, literally this last week, we've launched our first blockchain game that does everything that we wanted it to do with a crypto wallet, crypto gaming wallet that contains all of your attributes and everything else. But we basically built API along with it so that everything that we've done is now turnkey for you. So I think that's happening a lot as things are being developed. Suddenly you can study other people's contracts, smart contracts, they're all there, so you can actually just get your head around it by looking through the code of the games that you like. So that's a great way to sort of to accelerate the learning curve. That's one way of going about it.
Yeah, I would reinforce that. Absolutely right. Look into it. Pick one and see how they have done. This is how we started back in the day, right? We would reverse engineer games and look at their assembly code to see how they were done. This is how you should do right now, because there's not a lot of good, consistent documentation yet, right? It's something that is complicated and it's not properly integrated on the engines and the platforms that you're used to, like Unity, Unreal, Game Maker, and so on. So look at what people like NEVERDIE and Alex are doing, etc. Open it up and learn from that. I think that is probably the best way for you to get started on it.
Yeah, we reckon that we've cut your development time down by 75% just because of what we've left open for you. Right. So that's huge. I mean, and games on the blockchain right now, because you kind of have to make rudimentary games, can be quite cheap. So if you can take off 6 months of your dev time by reusing things or whatever, then you can experiment cheaply and make a cheap game.
Yeah, I don't think most of you, although it's very, very interesting diving into it, and I actually do strongly recommend it, even just for pure theoretical reasons. But Decentraland have an SDK if you're doing web stuff and just want to experiment in JavaScript. We'll have a Unity plugin for what we're doing at Fig in the near future. We're going to just encourage hackathons and people to play with that. There's several other game projects that will have Unity and Unreal plugins. So it will become easier for everyone to play with. But it's still good to have some interest in what's going on underneath because it will help you work out what you can do with it.
Yeah, I would advise to read the Bitcoin white paper first and then start to delve into the rest.
Yeah, that is actually the best advice. The Bitcoin white paper is astonishingly readable and understandable, and it's not very long. And you can Google it, and that was the start of everything. And if you want to know how any of this stuff works, read the Bitcoin white paper. Really good advice.
Cool. I have to be kind of a bit careful with my final question because I feel like you guys could talk about this for a very long time. But as we kind of wrap up, if we're at Pong or Space Invaders now, where are blockchain games in kind of 5 to 10 years? It's a very big question.
I think they will be pervasive. I think there will be aspects of Bitcoin, of blockchain in every game that has microtransactions in 5 years' time. I think it will be very fast because it's in the benefit of the publishers particularly to do this. There is a new revenue avenue for them. And as we know, they are struggling with some revenue avenues like loot boxes and so on. Right? They are a bit at loss. What can we do now? We cannot do premium, we cannot do subscription, it's all microtransaction, loot boxes is closed, or what else. It will come as a very high incentive for them to embrace. So I think it will be much faster adoption than most people would think.
Yeah, and I don't think that all games necessarily need to have a blockchain, but if there is some commercial aspect or some revenue model into your game in 15 years' time, then it's going to be more like, how come the items that I'm buying are not in an open network? You mean they are on your database, on your server? I cannot take them away. What if your game fails?
This is one of those things that when you go in one direction, very hard for you to go back to the old ways as a player. Right?
Yeah, but it's 15 years from now, I think.
Well, maybe.
I go 5. I'm with
you.
you.
Go 5. You go 5
years.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
I'll go 10 then.
Compromise.
I think we're going to end up with an internet of property. And I think it doesn't exist yet. The internet of property is all the stuff that we own being interconnected, and that could be across brands, media, products, games, music, film. Blockchains will enable an internet of property.
It's big words, I guess. As we kind of draw to a close out, I think you guys, it's a topic that I'm sure plenty of people are curious about. I think I'm not sure if there's someone still out there with a mic, but I think we're happy to open it up to questions if there's anything.
Some questions? I see one there. There you go.
Can we get that microphone?
Microphone is coming.
Yeah. Thank you for your conversation. I think it's very interesting. From a game design point of view, I'm a designer, and I felt very compelled about the thing of having an ecosystem that is cross-product, and you can have items and skills, and even your own avatar move between worlds. I imagine, as NEVERDIE said, that an apple needs to be an apple in every one of those products, so you have to keep value, and value, you stated that it's the effort that player made. So if I have an avatar that I've spent 300 hours in WoW, for example, and I move to another product, I don't know if you have put any thought on how I manage content, because I need to give content to that player that have already 300 hours of effort on that game, but also to players that are newcomers, that are totally noobs and doesn't have anything, any value. And I don't know if you have put any thought on that.
Can I take this
Sure,
one?
please,
This is hard, and we were having this discussion an hour ago at lunch and trying to figure out, because it is a very hard problem to solve. The example we use is that an item which is very rare from Alex's game, and in my game, because very rare, has a lot of power, and all of a sudden Alex changes his game and make it a mundane item that everybody has, and that breaks the balance of my game. So there are all these problems. But something that dawned on me during that discussion is that there is something like this that already happened. Suppose that you have played Quake for 10 years, right? And you are a very good Quake player. You go and play Call of Duty, which is the same skill set, isn't it? It's a first-person shooter, or you play Half-Life or whatever. So this already happens. You transfer skills. What you learn on game A, you take to game B, and that doesn't seem to disrupt game B. What can disrupt games is stats. Right, is the accumulation of stats, because they are not translatable for gameplay skill. They are an arbitration of value that we created, the game created, and gave to that. So I think NEVERDIE have a very good solution, which is have these dynamic levers that can change the stats as and if their value should change on game A or B. Right? There's no solution for this right now. It's too early days. But I can see how machine learning could help a lot on that in adjusting these parameters on the fly, understanding where they came from and what they should be represented inside your game. And if they change halfway through, it could dynamically adjust as well.
Yeah, you can, when you're creating your game, you can tell your game to read those items in whatever way you want. You could say, well, I don't want those items to be read as super powerful, but I'll let them be readable. Or I don't mind that somebody comes into this world with a powerful weapon. It doesn't matter that they acquired it somewhere else, because they're just, what that player is then just going to, they're just going to not have all the fun going through the starter experience with their overpowered weapons. Just depends on the type of game, but the developer can choose to read what is in your blockchain, your wallet, or your address in whatever way that they want, which is really cool to as a developer to go, oh, cool, I can make whatever I want out of that.
You can do really cool design things, and by cool I mean you could be really evil or really innovative. If you have a super high power weapon in your backpack, well, you're going to be rubbish in my game, unless you've got rid of it and you've been rid of it a week. And although that sounds really daft, and it is, actually what you can do is try and encourage all kinds of interesting behavior from your gamers as a community to work together to change the way people are playing at that point in time. And you can use these levers without you having to manage databases all the time and so on, and across multiple games.
I think that your game mechanics are something that is too critical for you to allow a lot of things from outside to influence it. But I do think that there are going to be some interesting exploration areas around how can I monetize a game mechanic that anyone can use, and the permission to use a game mechanic that I liked from some balance system from another game into my game, paying a fee inside of the blockchain or something like that. That's going to be definitely something interesting to explore.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, I think we have run out of time. I hope you guys have understood a little bit better what blockchain is about. And if you haven't, still have a little bit time to understand it and to join the movement. Thank you very much, guys, for sharing all this knowledge with us. Thank you, Stephen, Jon, Enrique, Alex, and Esteban.